You're live on Newsfeed, the AM edition. I'm Ayanda Nyati. Thanks very much for starting the day with us. And as we do at the beginning of each day, we give you a sense of what to expect so far as the news cycle is concerned. Today is absolutely no different. And joining us to do that job, as is always the case, is our news editor, Zain Semmar. Zain, once again, thanks for coming through. Another busy day ahead of us, and hopefully the fatigue is not setting into many South Africans as it might be in many journalists type of world. But let's start with what's on Newzroom Africa's diary this morning.
Okay, so this morning, Ayanda, thank you. State capture, we continue to cover what is becoming fast a very, very important story, has been for the last year or so, but also the testimony coming out of there. Another witness is expected to apply for an in-witness or testimony to be heard today. So for me, this is quite important because now a few witnesses already have applied for in-camera testimony, showing the kind of, I think, fear that is attached to the process that is happening. Yesterday, Mr. X giving us some more damning kind of testimony, linking former President Jacob Zuma directly to his foundation rather, directly to monies being moved around.
Yeah.
Really. So we continue to do that. And then also, we're having a look, we're speaking to Herman Mashaba about his new investigating unit that he's starting. He's indicated that he will be starting a new private prosecutions unit. Quite an interesting move from Herman Mashaba. And then also we'll be in Cape Town, obviously bringing you the latest of the South African Parliament SONA debate and the theatrics of politicians and what they're getting up to in Parliament. Quite a low, I think, for South African politics yesterday, with politicians trading insults about gender-based violence and using basically what is a very serious issue in South Africa to score political points. I mean, in a country with the femicide rate being 5 times higher than most other countries in the world, it's quite a sensitive issue for politicians to be haggling about in Parliament and actually going so personal into each other's lives. But that's the state of South African politics.
I remember somebody saying, the state of the nation address reflects the state of the nation.
Yes.
You know, just the chaos and the lack of decorum that we're seeing there is actually a microcosm for the macrocosmic reality of our country. So, yeah, we'll get into that in just a moment, of course.
Another big story that we're watching today, Ayanda, is Energy and Minerals Minister Gwede Mantashe is expected to address Parliament to speak about his plan and the plan around independent power producers. A lot of questions currently being asked, why the delay, why is the minister so attached to coal, etc., etc. So quite an interesting story because it speaks to the heart of the problems we have at Eskom.
Absolutely, absolutely, without a doubt. So we'll use that to segue into the newspapers if we can. So the Star is obviously leading with exactly what we saw coming out of the National Assembly yesterday, the ongoing wall-to-wall character assassinations over what you've already mentioned, Zain, was an incredibly critical issue, which was mostly the gender-based violence. So this morning, they're reflecting essentially on the many sentiments that came from MPs who obviously, when they could get a word in, spoke out against what was actually happening there. So we saw, of course, DA MP Natasha Matsone saying it was a very sad day to be a South African yesterday, as well as other ANC MPs who've come, obviously, to also play politics by gunning after Malema over his refusal to answer that question. So in case you had missed it yesterday, just to give you a sense of what happened, yesterday was meant to be essentially a reply to the State of the Nation address, as is always the case after the President delivers that important speech. However, at some stage, mostly during EFF leader Julius Malema's address, a lot of MPs interrupted to pose allegations against the alleged abuse of his wife to him. Malema refused to engage the MPs whilst he was still reading his speech, and that, of course, sort of led to backlash, which descended into chaos. So various moments when Malema was stopped from going over with his speech, he was very adamant that he will address things as he sees fit. So his contention was, whilst he'll speak to the question, he wants to finish his speech first and then address some of those responses. Needless to say, when that eventually happened, he then posed counter-allegations against Cyril Ramaphosa and the abuse of his former late wife. So it really, like you said, then was a difficult time for many South Africans, because we all understand how absolutely important issues around gender-based violence was, and to watch it, I don't know, be stripped of whatever dignity the conversation might have had in the ways that it was incredibly difficult. So no doubt this is taking over various headlines, and you'll see that in just a moment. But let's also reflect on a story that's adjacent to the Star this morning, and that, of course, is the resignation of outgoing Vice-Chancellor of Wits University, that's Adam Habib. Depending on who you ask about this, I think you'll get different reflections. Yes. I think a whole lot more people started paying attention to his leadership style during the 2015-2016 Fees Must Fall protests, which is why it's very interesting this morning that they're reflecting on Mcebo Dlamini's sentiments. And Mcebo, you'll remember, was one of the student leaders during that time who, at least in the public, had quite a, I don't know, hostile, bitter relationship with the Vice-Chancellor, as you would expect. However, his sentiments in this morning's article are quite different. You know, he's actually not very happy that the Vice-Chancellor is leaving, going so far as to say that nobody except Adam Habib would have managed that moment in 2015-2016. So certainly, at least in as much as he can, taking his hat off to a man who I understand had butted heads with for quite some time during that period. So that's the Star this morning. What's on the business day? The
business day is leading with a story, Cocoa-linked company, 81 million claim irks Eskom. So the story that Carol Patton has basically written is about Impulse International. Now, Impulse International is a company linked to former acting CEO, Eskom CEO, Matela Koko's daughter. Wow. You remember that there's an allegation that he provided contracts to the tune of over 100 million to companies linked to his daughter at the time that he was the CEO. So this story is basically about this company, Impulse International, now suing Eskom for more than 81 million. Eskom basically saying, we're not paying you a cent of that money because the initial contracts with your company is in any case subject to an investigation by the State Capture Commission.
So this might backfire?
Yes, this might backfire on Impulse International. And you'll also remember Matela Koko was implicated in a parliamentary inquiry into Eskom. He was labeled there as one of the executives that might have acted unethically, even criminally. And also he resigned at a time when he was asked to appear before a disciplinary committee. So quite a lot of questions around the story. And then the second story, which I think you're also going to pick up, and is in the other newspapers, is basically that Stats SA's council is set to quit over a cash crunch.
When I came across this, and you're right, it's also on the business report of the Star this morning. And, you know, we're hearing that the threat is, you know, a mass sort of resignation, if you like. And this is so important because Stats SA, by and large, amid the Armageddon, as some people might describe it, with so many institutions falling apart, Stats SA appeared at least to be the one institution that's still holding to the core. We often rely on the figures that come out of Stats SA. And that's because we believe the ways in which it's been run. So if this is what we might have to deal with in the future, you know, many people might ask, what else do we have left? You know, as South Africans, where can we look?
And what kind of data are we going to be relied on? What is the data that we can trust in order to make all these important determinations?
Absolutely, particularly because I understand AfriForum is also going to be giving their sort of statistics on farm murders today. So we'd usually juxtapose that against what Stats SA has to offer.
Which brings me to an important story that I almost missed on our Newzroom Africa diary. So AfriForum, this lobby group, is releasing stats today about what they call farm murders. What we're doing with the story is, obviously in the past, a lot of the numbers and figures were contested, as were the methodology as to how they compiled these figures and whether it included violence between communities surrounding farms, or what kind of farm murders are they talking about, how do they label it. So what we'll be doing with that story is we'll be speaking to Africa Check,
right,
to check the figures. So we are working in conjunction with Africa Check just to kind of level out those numbers being presented by AfriForum today.
Absolutely. So hopefully we'll be able to stave off whatever dispute might exist at Stats SA. We understand that they're calling for a 200 million rand cash injection to try and save that agency. As of course experts warn that its demise actually might destroy South Africa, and we certainly didn't need the experts to tell us that. The recent history insofar as Stats SA's figures is concerned has shown us exactly that. So certainly one of the big stories. Another
story that the Business Day is running in its international section, Ayanda, is the propaganda about virus breeds outrage and cynicism in China. Now, there's a lot of cynicism around the figures. American newspapers and magazines have been writing continuously about the allegations that the Chinese government is actually suppressing some of the information coming out of China. We've seen huge jump over the last week or so, numbers from under 1,000 to over 2,000 at the moment about infected deaths. So a lot of people suggesting that the numbers coming out of China is not the real figure, and this article basically dealing with some of those issues. On The Citizen today, House of Insults, picture of EFF leader Julius Malema, as we've discussed already.
Right.
It dominates their page 2. And then a story that I see, it's just a follow-on, is that Malema is planning to sue Boy Mamabolo of the ANC.
Right.
And I just interestingly read and short opinion by Pierre de Vos, a legal expert this morning, who says that members are actually protected in the House, that you can't be sued for anything that is said in the House.
Sure. But I understand that part of the reason why Malema is actually going for that is because he had repeated the statements outside the House. And I remember him having mentioned that. Whether or not that happened, I mean, I don't have those facts in front of me, but it's certainly the allegation. It's on that note that we'll take a look at some of your reactions to this very story. Of course, many of you are following this quite closely. We'll start with Mapula, who says, if Malema is abusing anyone, let that person lay a charge with police. If Boy, that's Boy Mamabolo, has evidence, he must share it with the public. Knowing Boy, I'll not even entertain him because he's full of lies. Replying, of course, to Newzroom Africa's tweets. Kwena says, I won't be surprised when one day Boy and Juju fight in that parliament. And this is the concern. It's becoming very personal. Africa Buffalo says, based on this clip, which captures the question and its context, I strongly agree with Julius Malema on his answer. Malema did exactly what Boy wanted to achieve, expose women abusers. Why is it wrong when it's Julius Malema exposing an abuser in that house? Okay. Sakile says, one thing Boy Mamabolo and Julius Malema have not learned about life is that you can't throw mud at a person and not get dirty. It makes it worse that names of a dignified person, and that's Mandra, which is Julius Malema's wife, and a deceased person, that's referring to President Cyril Ramaphosa's former wife, are used. The two guys have disgraced themselves, #Sona debate. And that's the overall sentiment, really, the sentiment of disgrace, right? I think many people have hung their heads in shame. I anticipate many more will be apprehensive about watching today's leg of those replies. But we'll certainly do our duty to bring you those details. So that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Zain, for coming through and helping us understand some of these big stories. Zain Semmar is, of course, our news editor here on Newzroom Africa. So still to come after the break, we'll take a look at insurance companies that provide low-cost health care facing the risk of being shut down. Kerry Hartog from RH with Halo Insurance will join us for the very latest on this story. Details in just a moment. Do stay with us.